I think it's fair to say that most of the people watching this know at least the gist of the story of Final Fantasy I. The 4 Warriors of Light save the world by defeating the 4 Fiends and restoring elemental crystals, and also defeating Chaos, aka the Dark Knight Garland. I mean, there's a bit more to it than that, like weird time loops and prophecies and all that, but in a nutshell, that's kind of the plot of Final Fantasy I. So, did you ever wonder what made Garland be so evil and become Chaos in the first place? No? Not really? Oh, well, so that's kind of the plot of Stranger of Paradise, so I guess somebody wondered enough to make an entire game out of it. Before I get into the meat of this review, I want to thank the people at Square Enix for providing a copy of this game for me to play and review. I wanted to get this review done earlier, closer to the time of release, but life really got in the way these past couple of months, and even though it's been a little while, I am determined to catch up and make good on the implied promise of a review. I really appreciate the chance they took on me. I've tried to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible, but there are some aspects that needed to be spoiled a little to properly talk about it, so be warned before continuing. If you're okay with that, cool. And if you're interested in seeing more RPG reviews and story deep dives, then drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you can see the other videos I'll be making in the future. And now on to the rest of the video. So, Stranger of Paradise released on March 18th, 2022, and follows the story of a man named Jack Garland, a man who is, for some reason, absolutely intent on destroying Chaos. He's joined by his companions Ash and Jed, and later Neon and Sophia, who each have their own opinions on the nature of chaos and the darkness infecting the world, but their paths go in the same direction, so they may as well fight side by side. In very basic terms, the game acts as a prequel and expansion to the story of Final Fantasy I, which on its own is kinda cool, because I do like story expansions and seeing how things came to be, even if I didn't particularly feel the need for said expansion. But because this is a Final Fantasy spin-off expansion extra story title thing, you know it's gotta be way more convoluted than just providing some backstory with a dark and edgy flavor. Turns out there's a whole load of connections to the Dissidia spin-off titles too, which makes sense because Dissidia is another series that connects strongly to the story of Final Fantasy I. But it also connects to loads of other Final Fantasy games, so there is a crap ton of callbacks in Stranger of Paradise too. Usually in terms of dungeons and environmental design, so it's a fun set of Easter eggs for long-term fans of the series as a whole. I kinda like that. But having not actually played any of the Dissidia games, I feel like some of the depth of the story was just completely lost on me. If you've watched my review of World of Final Fantasy, and if you haven't, I'll link it in the description so you can check it out later, you might remember me commenting that going through worlds inspired by other Final Fantasy games and seeing a bunch of characters from those games was kinda cool, and a nice treat for fans, but without the context of having played all those other games, the character cameos and cool environmental design really didn't mean all that much. When you encounter places or people from those games that you haven't played, they're not a fun Easter egg, they're just places or people, nothing special. You miss out on the fun of identifying the cameo and appreciating the what-ifness of having a character from one game show up in another. The game might still make perfect sense even if you don't have all that context, but if you do have the context, you appreciate everything all the more, and things become more meaningful and have more impact. And not having played the Dissidia games, yeah, some stuff just didn't carry the same weight with me as it might for people who have played them. Don't get me wrong, the game is still pretty good, and from what I can tell, the story does make sense. But it's one where I actually had to look up the Dissidia connections, because some of it was just, why? Why is all this happening? What the actual hell is up with this whole multiple worlds thing, and people from beyond who are masterminding the balance of this world, and manufactured memory loss, and when the answer to all the questions a game brings up is, go play all these other games, it admittedly feels less like a necessary expansion to one game's lore, and more like an attempt to boost sales in a parallel franchise. Plus you get the King of Cornelia encountering this group of 4 people who seem bent on destroying chaos, seeing all of them have very dark crystals, and going, oh yeah, you must be the prophesied Warriors of Light because I said so. Yeah, sure, seems legit. Seriously, what was the king smoking before this audience that he looked at darkness and saw light anyway? But okay, so the story might not hold the greatest appeal to anyone but the die-hardiest of Final Fantasy fans. That's okay. Not every game is for every person. But for those who think they might enjoy Stranger of Paradise, what sort of gameplay are they going to encounter? Square Enix seems to be leaning hard into action RPGs these days, which aren't exactly my preferred genre. I'm a basic turn-based bitch after all, but I can enjoy that style of combat if it's done right. And by done right, I mean, are there ways that allow my lousy brain to actually handle what's happening on screen? Yep, it's time to talk about game accessibility and difficulty settings. Thankfully, Stranger of Paradise is actually really good about its difficulty settings. You've got your typical easy, normal, and hard modes, with a chaos difficulty unlocked after you beat the game once, allowing for an even more challenging experience on a second playthrough. But if you're playing on easy, which the game refers to as story mode, you can also turn on casual mode to give yourself some extra breathing room and more peace of mind in battle. You can really make the game as easy or as hard as you want to make it, allowing for difficulty customization that fits your needs. No shame if you play on easy and casual if you want to focus more on advancing the story than the battles. With my disability issues, that's what I did. Will I play on harder difficulty settings later, now that I'm more used to the game and what it expects of me? Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy testing the limits of my ability, but I also enjoy experiencing a game in my own way and at my own pace, and I was really glad to see that Stranger of Paradise gave me that ability, as well as the ability to change the difficulty settings at save points if I felt like I was ready to try a bit more of a challenge. But accessibility goes beyond just being able to adjust the difficulty. Stranger of Paradise also gives you the option to customize a lot of button inputs, and remapping that stuff is a key accessibility feature. Even if it's not something that I particularly need, I'm happy that it's included as an option for those who do need it. There are also subtitles, brightness level adjustments, a lot of little tweaks here and there that allow for a greater positive experience from a variety of players. I will say though, that even with the difficulty adjustments and control remapping, Stranger of Paradise still is an action RPG, so people who have issues with fine motor control or reaction times might find this game pretty unapproachable. Which sucks, but at the same time, that seems to be an issue with the style of game rather than this game itself. The whole genre can be a little bit exclusive in that way, I think. Honestly though, for my part, I found the combat to be pretty fun. The game works with a job system, with each character fitting into a sort of archetype of job classes, with skill trees that they can master before switching it up and trying something new. Jack, of course, can use any job he wants because he has protagonist powers, and he has 2 primary loadouts that he can switch between at the push of a button. Very handy, especially since some dungeon puzzles require the use of magic, so being able to just press one button to switch Jack to a mage rather than going into the menu, switching jobs, outfitting him in the best gear I have for that class just in case I get into a surprise battle I didn't see coming, then doing it all again to switch back to my primary job class afterwards. You can see why the quick switch option can be really handy. Going through dungeons nets you a lot of gear, with the levels of the gear varying according to the dungeon's level. Sort of. It's more like the dungeon itself has a recommended equipment level that the party should meet before attempting it, since traditional character levels aren't really a thing here. Go through dungeons, get loot, equip party to max, and move on to the next dungeon to further the story. Sort of. See, in many sections of the game, the equipment drops you get tend to outfit the party pretty well in order to progress smoothly to the next story beat, with maybe needing to do a side quest before moving on to the next main mission. It's kinda pointless to grind a single dungeon over and over for experience, since your character growth is measured by job levels, which mostly give you skills and abilities, and equipment levels, which give you your stats. Other times, there's a gap between what you have equipped now and what level of equipment is recommended for the next dungeon crawl, and no opportunities to actually get equipment at the right level. The dungeons are often still doable even if you're, quote, underleveled, so long as you've got the hang of the game and are willing to take a few risks. But it just seemed a bit odd to me that most of the game is a nice streamlined experience, except for the bits where it's really not. Equipment combined with the job tree system make for a really interesting situation where you're often gaining skills in a job that you're not actually even using right now. See, a lot of equipment has affinity with certain jobs, sort of like a bonus stat. Let's say you're playing as a duelist and dual-wielding daggers as your weapon, but your boots have some affinity with the knight job class. When you defeat enemies, you'll gain job experience for both your primary job of duelist, but also a percentage of experience for the knight job too. If you work your equipment setup in a particular way, you can end up maxing out jobs you've never even used. Or, at the very least, unlock a few things on the skill tree so that you're not starting entirely from scratch if and when you decide to experiment and use different job classes. Mostly this matters for Jack since he can use any job, whereas the other characters are much more limited in their job class options. Jack's companions can only use 5 jobs each, where Jack has access to the full complement of 28 jobs to choose from. So you can equip Neon with loads of things that will give her samurai experience, for instance, but she will never be able to use the samurai job. But you do have the cool bonus of equipment actually changing character appearances, which carries over into cutscenes. I don't know why, but I find that level of detail to be really cool. Maybe it's just because I'm an old fart who grew up during the time where equipment didn't change appearances at all, and a lot of cutscenes and stuff were pre-rendered anyway, so I'm just constantly and pleasantly surprised when I see examples of how far gaming technology has come. As an aside, I do kinda love games with job systems. I'm one of those people who will take the time to master every freaking job if I can, especially when it's part of a game I'm already really enjoying. I like the satisfaction of seeing all the slots on the skill trees unlocked and the characters being as strong and prepared as I can get them. I do have to say too that this game looks really nice. Like the graphics, even on my PS4, not even a PS4 Pro, look great. The cinematic touch even carries over into boss battles, where Jack must perform a particular move in most of them in order to reach a boss's second form or just end the battle entirely. It's a really aesthetically pleasing experience to both play or watch Stranger of Paradise, not gonna lie. Really though, while Stranger of Paradise does a lot to draw in potential audiences, I think the subset of people who will really appreciate it is kind of small. It kind of appeals primarily to people who are big fans of Final Fantasy and its spin-offs, and who are interested in expanded lore, and who are also looking for a sort of Souls-light game to entertain them. It's not that other people won't be able to appreciate anything about Stranger of Paradise. After all, I liked it well enough despite not being able to appreciate all of the lore or being spectacularly good at action RPGs, but I suspect those who will get the most out of it are rather few and far between. And while it did make me curious about the Dissidia games, it also made me a little bit annoyed that I'm missing out on the game's full context because I haven't played them yet, and didn't realize until I'd already started playing this one. I love me some dark fantasy, and I enjoy exploring a game or story's full potential and seeing how new elements can contribute to something that's already been long established, but certain aspects of Stranger of Paradise made me hesitant to recommend this game too highly. The combat is fun, the adjustable challenge is appreciated, and I really do like the graphics and exploring the isolated instances of each dungeon, but the accessibility of the story is what really holds this game back for me. And chances are, that's because I'm not the primary target audience. I don't hold the game to be particularly at fault here, because if you explore around and make sure you do all the side missions and all that, you do get given decent context for everything that's happening. As a self-contained game, well, no, I can't even really say what I was gonna say there. Stranger of Paradise isn't a self-contained game. I mean, you can play it without having played the other Final Fantasy games, I guess, but then you'd be lacking so much context for the story because this is a dark prequel to Final Fantasy I, as well as its ties to the Dissidia franchise. Play it without all that context, and it's just an action RPG with some nice graphics, smooth combat, a competent job and equipment system, and that's kind of it. Right from the beginning, with Jack, Ash, and Jed visiting Cornelia and speaking to the king and Princess Sarah, and later being told they're the Warriors of Light, the game expects you to know why that stuff is relevant and really give a damn about it, because it expects that at the very least, you know the story of Final Fantasy I. It's not unreasonable to expect that someone knows a franchise's main story before playing the prequel, and the marketing makes no secret about Stranger of Paradise's position in that timeline. It's hard to go into this without knowing that stuff. But that does mean the game's story isn't self-contained, isn't a standalone thing that anyone can just pick up because it looks fun. It expects things of you before you ever buy it, and that needs to be taken into account when you do consider buying it. So if you're a fan of action RPGs and have some good working knowledge of FF1, and preferably Dissidia also, then you'll probably enjoy a lot of aspects of Stranger of Paradise. But for others, this is probably a title you may as well just pass over. Unless you want to take a trip down the twisted rabbit hole that is the expanded storyline that Stranger of Paradise connects to anyway. More power to you if you're up for that.